Rae Chesny, welcome to American Black Journal.
Thank you so much, Stephen.
Yeah, so I'm really excited to have you here, and I'm really excited for this conversation. I feel like Zora Neale Hurston is both a well-known figure in literature and history and all kinds of other things, but also kind of an obscure figure in some ways. Like people don't know as much about her as they think they should. One of my favorite kind of trivia things about her is the number of little Black girls I knew growing up whose names were Zora. And I always kind of assumed that that's why they were named that way. It speaks to her influence. But let's start with your fascination with Zora Neale Hurston. What is it about her and her work that draws you to her?
Yeah, so I agree with you. It's funny because if you bring up Zora's name, people will say, oh yeah, the lady who wrote Their Eyes Are Watching God. I love that book. Mm-hmm. But there's so much more to her that we need to know. And we're right between Black History and Women's History Month. And so I think this is a perfect time. My fascination actually started in 2018 when a professor at Michigan State invited me to do a Black History presentation. And as a writer, I have been working with children. We had collaborated through partnership with after-school programming and summer camps. He said, the kids love you, my students love you, come do a Black History presentation on the person who most influenced your career as a writer. And I was actually a reluctant reader as a child, so I didn't have anyone who really influenced me. I just always loved to tell stories. But Stephen, he gave me this magical word that really changed my mind. He said, I will pay you an honorarium. And so, I
that is a magic word.
Yes, I had never heard that word in conjunction with my name. So I felt very inspired. And so I set out to do the presentation on Langston Hughes because I love the Harlem Renaissance. Of course, Langston is probably the most popular person from the Harlem Renaissance. And I love that he was a poet, used everyday language, and focused on working class Black men. But as I kept researching Langston, I didn't find a personal connection. Instead, I found Zora Neale Hurston, and I started going down this rabbit hole. I'm like, oh, wait, she was raised in the first all Black incorporated municipality, which just means legally established town in the history of the United States. Her father was mayor 3 times. She was a trained anthropologist in 1928. She interviewed the last person to live during slavery and be enslaved. How come we don't know about her? And she was best friends with Langston Hughes during the Harlem Renaissance. And so I was like, well, how come we don't learn about her? But then I asked myself a hard question. How come I wasn't presenting Zora Neale Hurston? And so that first year I tacked her on to the end of the presentation as an and with Langston Hughes. And the sensation as I was presenting her, I would start sweating and everything. And I joked that it was probably Zora jumping up from the grave, telling me, don't ever make me an and. And I promised her in that moment, if I ever got another chance to do a Black History presentation, she would be the star of the show. And she has been since that moment. Funny enough, I was assigned Their Eyes Were Watching God in high school, and I did not read the book.
Well, that's pretty common. That's a pretty common thing to happen, right? We all kind of skim in high school. I feel like a lot of the work that she did is especially relevant right now, given the things that we're talking about, and given our renewed focus on the importance of Black history to the present and to the future.
Absolutely. She was typically out of step with the Black thought leaders at the time. She had a lot of pride. At that time, W.E.B. Du Bois had coined the phrase the talented 10th. And so Zora really opposed that ideology because it separated a certain class of Black people, this upper echelon, away from the roots, the history. And so she did fight to preserve that and to also share it in creative ways. One of the interesting things about Zora is that she often did not want to write full-length novels because it takes so much time. And I can tell you as a writer, it's a lot of investment. It's a long shot. It's a lot of investment of time, of resources. You can't fully work a full-time job. And so she actually took her anthropological field work and staged it as plays. And so she was very focused on theater. And if she could have had her choice, that is what she would have wanted to do. When it came to writing, short stories was kind of her sweet spot. And she felt, hey, I could churn some of those out and still do the plays, still do the anthropological work, but showcase authentic Black life. And even beyond that, life throughout the African diaspora. She traveled to Jamaica and Haiti. Her first application for the Guggenheim was actually to go to West Africa, the Gold Coast, as it was called back then, to trace these roots, to say, hey, the Southern Negro is not as far from these original West African spiritual practice, cultural practices that still exist in Black culture today.
So tell us a little more about the book that you're working on, which is, of course, about Zora Neale Hurston. What is the focus of it, and what thrills you about the work? I think if you're not thrilled to be writing a book, you're not going to finish. So,
right. And I would say equal parts thrilled and nervous, because it's deeply personal. So it's part memoir and part biography of Zora, part memoir for me. When I started presenting on her after that first presentation in 2018, I decided to write her a letter. And I don't know, it's that writer thing. Sometimes things just come to you and you do it and you don't understand why until later. And so I started writing her letters, and it was my way to try to communicate with her and do something more so than just think about things in my head. This was our communication. And so it progresses, the book does, with these very intimate letters from the first time I presented on her to present day. And so it's documenting my unexpected journey in becoming a Zora scholar, but it also annotates and gives context about Zora. So just like if we were friends and we were having some, random conversation, someone listening in might not understand the references of what we're talking about. But for me, I always want to give my audience, my readers, a chance to start doing their own research. So we have citations, context, annotations, facts about Zora that are little known, random things like, oh, it's your birthday, Zora. I made you fried shrimp and okra because that was your favorite thing. Or I saw a magnolia tree today and I thought about you because that was her favorite flower. But it also goes into some of the other things, talking about her schools of thought in comparison to W.E.B. Du Bois and other Black thought leaders. She was team Booker T. Washington, I should say.
Right.
And how she really felt about her life is very personal. And most of the time I remind people I'm a Zora scholar, not a Hurston scholar, because my relationship with her is deeply personal.